All right, let's get down to the Mr. Gloat Podcast, ladies and gentlemen. We come to you viewers live from a place called Gray, but a place that's new to the bone. We have a lot of Oscar De La Hoya to talk about here today, and it's going to be a doozy. This episode, we're going to take you viewers live from September the 18th, 2004, the pay-per-view of Bernard Hopkins versus Oscar De La Hoya. Two fighters, one legit champion. Now, keep this in mind. The WBO belt was still a minor weight belt back in 2004. Bernard Hopkins holds all of the belts that are undisputed, and Oscar holds onto the WBO belt. So technically, they do count this as being the first ever legit four-weight class championship belt, but would you ever want to point that in? No, I can't. But before we get to this, we might as well have to talk about the events that happened on June the 20th, 5 days ago, and try to understand what went wrong, and, well, depending on who you're asking. But again, the real story is the championship titles, the dates that are going on. The world of professional boxing is on a tipsy-turvy point with the competitors of action. Now, of course, competition of boxing has been tough. We have a lot of interesting shows that happen around the time in the USA and the UK, but unfortunately, not a lot of them were live, so I'm not going to get through with them. Frank Warren would promote our show on June the 20th in St. Mary's Stadium, where Ryan Garner won his 20th pro fight to win the vacant WBC interim world super featherweight champion against an Italian fighter named Michael Magnesi. We also had a 15-1 fighter named Brad Goldsmith, who was not favored to take on Brad Pauls, who was a 21-2-1 fighter, fighting for the IBF International Middleweight Championship. But surprisingly, Bradley came in there, knocked down Pauls in round 6. Pauls did recover and went the distance of 10 rounds, but the judging scorecards told it a wide margin of a decision. Lewis Edmonton would pick up another win against Lyndon Arthur after Lewis Edmonton actually lost against Daniel Lapine in July last year ago, which was the pay-per-view of the Undisputed Heavyweight Championship 2 with Usyk and Dubois 2 fight. And then Daniel Lapine lost in the Pyramids of Giza last month ago against Benjamin Tani. Ugh. That fight really shocked me when I actually saw that fight. But man, what some action fights there. But as for the other stuff on the show, it's just a bunch of guys with undefeated records taking on jobbers with that's the UK for you. That's what they do. It's ridiculous. So not much of a show there. They did promote out other stuff, but with other shows in the UK, nothing much to talk about, nothing much to look at. And I had to double check, but nothing. The US did have a match in Tuscaloosa, Alabama, which is still unknown to Rankins by promoter Jay. And even another show in Arizona actually did have one match with Kingsley Abed taking on Dante Stone. Dante Stone was the semifinal, the guy that got eliminated in the semifinals by eventual Argentina winner in the WBC Grand Prix tournament last year ago, which was Dante got knocked down in the first round, recovered, did try to fight back in the later of the last rounds of after 6 rounds, but wasn't enough. And unfortunately, Kingsley did win the fight, knocking down Dante in round 5, round 6, and again in round 8. The scores were wide, and it gives Kingsley 17-3-1 record, winning the WBC Fecker Box and the USA Arizona State Heavyweight Championship of the World, ranking him at number 28 in the heavyweight and number 3 in the USA of the greatest heavyweight boxer. So, not better than Deontay Wilder or Jarrell Miller, but yeah, he did surpass Richard Torres, so I guess that's a plus there. But we also have another fighter that goes by the name of Price Taylor. Price Taylor is from Brooklyn, New York, with a 12-0 record, and technically he's been putting out some interesting works in his career, but again, nothing much interesting. And considering he's ranked number 58 in the US and at number 5 in the USA, and number 58 in the world, Can't really say much about his career as well. So it just goes to show you that the world of American boxing is not in the sky high as it is. So I really can't say much about this for what it is. They also had some other heavyweight fights where they had a fighter with a 4-5-1 record winning against a 1-5 record. A debut fighter named Angel Lainez from Arizona wins his first fight against a 2-1 fighter in 4 rounds, heavyweight fight. A 6-round fight with Adam Stewart, who was 16-1-1, takes on Desmond Thompson, a 9-2 fighter, scores a second-round knockout. And yeah, there's nothing much about the heavyweight division in America. It really isn't there. I'm sorry, there's just nothing much I can say about that show. It's like there's other shows going on titled Saturday Night Fights, which took place in Kentucky, but nothing interesting other than there was a South Korean boxer that fought there on the show. But again, I really can't say much about it. The promoters, I am trying to figure out who they are, but it does take a long time to get used to knowing who they are. They did also have other shows from Texas, Pennsylvania. They had a Worlds Collide, the return of Bricktown Brawl in Oklahoma, which is kind of crazy as well. But again, nothing interesting on the card. There's nothing interesting. Technically, the only fight in the entirety of America that day was actually a minimum weight fight or a flyweight fight. Oscar Collazo took on the weight replacement of Nader Valdez, who weighed at 111 3/4 in a fight. A quarter of the fight. And Oscar Collazo was 110.5. So he gained off 5 or so pounds to go up to flyweight. So does that mean he's going up to the weight class? Well, BoxRec still shows he's number 1 in the minimum weight. So it seems like he's still going back down to minimum weight so he can take on Pedro Tadrin, because Tadrin wants to fight Oscar before he goes up to weight class. They even think that South African boxer Hughes, who defeated Melvin Jerusalem in a rematch in their second fight, should be a big choice, as they think they should have Hughes rematch Melvin for the title. And if that's legit, take on Oscar Collazo. So, but again, who knows? The entirety of the show by Oscar De La Hoya's Golden Boy promotion that day might not be much. 11-0 Mexican fighter won the vacant WBC Fecker Box and the WBO NABO Light Heavyweight Championship against a 14-1 fighter named Singh Bisla, who was actually living in Canada. We also have another guy named Daniel Garcia, which, again, I don't know who's related with. There's so many Garcias around the world that you don't even know who's related. I thought Mikey Garcia and Danny Garcia were related. I thought Mikey Garcia was related to Ryan Garcia. Robert Garcia working as training with Jesse the Bam Rodriguez. I don't know which Garcia is who. I really don't know. It's ridiculous. But again, that's about it. Still, Oscar scores a second round knockout with nothing going on. So I was worried if he was putting on weight in that fight. But again, at that weight differential, it is tough. Okay, so with all that being said, let's talk about what was going on around the time in the world of boxing, UFC, professional wrestling, you name it. Well, in UFC at the time, which is interesting, technically it is interesting because around the time in 2004, UFC has promoted out shows in Las Vegas, and their next show, they only promoted 4 shows in the event that year. From Supernatural in Las Vegas, around the time where in January they had a little bit of a controversial fight with a doctor stoppage, which Victor Belfort defeated Randy Couture for stoppage of a light heavyweight title championship. And BJ Penn defeated Matt Hughes in first round, so that was controversial. They went on to some shows around the time where around UFC 47, they had a moment with Chuck Liddell and Tito Ortiz, and mostly the show Payback, which took place in June, which was a show where Frank Mir defeated Tim Sylvia, who is still the only UFC champion born in the New England territory of Connecticut, Massachusetts, New Hampshire, Vermont, Maine, Rhode Island. Those are the 6 states of the Northeast where you can be a champion. And Tim Sylvia is still the only UFC championship born in those states. And you can guess the state? If you thought it was any other state other than Maine, you're wrong, because I'm still shocked that Tim Sylvia is a 2-time heavyweight championship, and that is just ridiculous for how he even did. It's ridiculous how Tim Sylvia, born in the state of Maine, he's living somewhere else as a police officer, I think in Michigan, I guess, and it's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. By the way, last August, they had the unfinished business where Randy Coucher defeated Victor Belfort to win back the champion by a doctor stoppage. Only this time it wasn't the first round, it was the end of the 3rd round. So a disappointing match, and they did have an event around some years ago, which was around the time they had the first event. That was the last UFC fight for a lightweight division until UFC 58, which would be a year and a half later. But again, they got the job done, and everyone got home quickly. That last show actually had Chuck Liddell being fight of the night against Vernon White, which ended in a 4-minute KO punch in the first round. Knockout of the night, unfortunately, that was David Terrell, who defeated Matt Lindland in 24 seconds in the first round. And submission of the night, that goes to none other than an unknown guy named Chris Little, spelled with a Y, defeating Ronald Chun by a guillotine choke. Unfortunately, that was the only submission of the entire night of the show. But with all shows going on, a lot of matches ended in KO. One ended by a split decision. It has to be one great show. I really enjoy it. So nothing much to be said about UFC or even anything else about Pride. And you know what? While we're doing it, let's talk about Pride and see what was been going on in 2004 in Pride, because around the time, Pride did took on some decent business doing a tournament for the Heavyweight Grand Prix tournament. They managed to put out a decent number where Fedor taking on Naoya Ogawa in the final conflict. They also had a Brazilian fighter named Antonio Rodrigo taking on Sergey, who was a Russian fighter at the time. And surprisingly, with all of that going on, they managed to have a tournament fight last month ago in August, which was the final conflict 4, which was the semifinal. Fedor defeated the Japanese fighter of Naoya, and our Brazilian guy managed to get through a 15-round unanimous decision against Sergey. Unfortunately, in the tournament, they went on. They fought twice. Both Fedor and Antonio both fought twice that same night. Unfortunately, the fight ended in a no contest due to an accidental cut at 3 minutes and 52 seconds of the fight, meaning the tournament ended abysmal. And actually, it is hard to try to find out who would become champion. But with all that being said, we're still trying to wait for updates on what's going to happen there, as Pride is still, because this was the Heavyweight Grand Prix tournament for Pride in 2004. So, it does stink that the tournament ended that way and it wasn't good. But surprisingly, they would have a rematch in December the 31st on Pride Shockwave 2004, where Fedor would take on the Intercontinental Champion the interim champion of Antonio. They went through 3 rounds of competition, and the Russian fighter won by unanimous decision in 3 rounds to become the Pride fighting champion of the world in the heavyweight. So, yeah, congratulations. But around that time, it makes you wonder how ridiculous that finish was. But at least they got their rematch, and the right winner won. So it's not bad. You got to throw it in. You got to throw it in. You got to throw it in. There's a lot to it that meets the eye. It's really that simple. So, by the way, before we get on to Oscar De La Hoya and Bernard Hopkins, we have to talk about what was going around the time of pro wrestling. On September the 13th, 2004, Wrestling Observer newsletter Rewinder, or not Observer, but Rewinder, stated that with everything going on here, they pointed out a lot of interesting issues. talking about how they had some prior disadvantages of Hall of Fame issues and such, and with a lot of problems into the battles from each of the contestants. But with the dramas going on backstage, there was also a list of somewhat of a list. There's also a list here that includes of in any way, here's the list, which shows number 1, Hulk Hogan with 66, Steve Austin 48, Ric Flair 42, Undertaker 40, number 5 is Triple H at number 30 with 39, Kevin Nash 29, tied with The Rock, Sting. There's so many people out there, and I don't know what that number was. I don't know if that's the most popular wrestler or the most votes. But again, whoever thought voting out for Hogan for the most of 66 votes back in 2004 is kind of funny once you think about it. But there's actually an interesting thing going on here, and it's not about the playoff. But actually, there is something interesting happening in the world when it comes to UFC and WWE as a whole for Vince McMahon and Dana White. You see, here's something interesting, because I find this to be somewhat of a shocking thing going on here. So Dave Meltzer got his hands on a bunch of UFC buy rates, which the buy rate numbers were around 80,000, and the rematch fights with Victor Belfort and Randy Couture were both 80,000 pay-per-view buys of the show with fighter payoffs and such. But the information of the business numbers were different, where it states here that they usually don't release and use to make interesting WWE comparisons, as mostly for everyone else, because UFC is a shoot and WWE is a work. But a lot of this is about payroll. Dave Meltzer was able to determine what the fighters made on the show versus with the revenue, where they use it to determine the percentage of UFC of paying fighters. Then compares that to to what WWE has known to pay. Seems to be about the same on average, but both wrestlers in the WWE and fighters in the UFC seem to be making around 15 to 20% of whatever the total revenue of shows is. Of course, you can compare that to other sports like baseball and football, where the athletes make a significantly higher percentage, but they have unions. Maybe wrestling should try that. But even taking unions out of their equation, name-level boxers often get a far higher percentage of an event revenue than both wrestlers and MMA fighters. As always, the people putting their bodies on the line for the sports have loved or who fully underpaid, while people like Vince McMahon and Dana White laughed all the way to the bank off the broken bodies of their performers. That right there is crazy. And by the way, this is 2004. This is 2004 we're talking about here. This is all around the time before the De La Hoya and Bernard Hopkins. So you're having that come into play there. That you can't come up with that stuff. 15 to 20% of the money. Imagine you're about to get like maybe $50,000. But then you get like, if you had to go through like $50,000 and try to divide that to 20%, you're getting like $2,500. Can you imagine $2,500 in today's money, like in 2004? Like, that's ridiculous. Like I'm just trying to equate that up there. Like we're trying to look up today's money there, what it would be like for that, because again, that's just ridiculous. So around the time with $2,500 in 2004, if you're getting like 20% of it with the $50,000, the equivalent in today's money is $4,407.36. That right there is a huge abysmal. So Imagine that. And imagine back in 1984. In 1984, where you had the whole incident of John Stossel taken on with Dr. D. David Schultz. And that right there is ridiculous. And you have the explosion of that. Like they had Eddie Mansfield talking about it on Dark Side of the Ring, that you have more than thousands and over 20,000 people pack the arena, and you're not getting paid on pennies on the dollar. You're not getting health and benefit insurances, nothing. That right there is horrible. And you have to understand, maybe Vince McMahon went so far into it, it just goes to show you that right there was problematic. You just couldn't hide from that. So back then might have been horrible amounts of money there. So yeah, I can see how tough this was. This was pretty tough. Like the buy rate, jeez. Like, you cannot make this stuff up. This is the most ridiculous amount of information I've ever heard. It's funny. But again, when reading this information right now, it's not. So there is some other information here on the Wrestling Observer talking about the Mexican newspaper where they've had current wrestlers and other stuff going on, but that would be too much of a paragraph. There's other paragraphs of this as well, so go look it up on Wrestling Observer Rewinder, because you will be surprised by the information here. There is an interesting information here, which this one made me laugh. This one made me laugh a lot. The IWA in Puerto Rico, another promotional wrestling promotion, attempted to book Steve Austin to come in as a special referee for a major show soon, but Austin was booked up with a movie commitment through the end of the year and turned it down worth a shot. Dude, imagine Puerto Rico screaming ridiculous when you have Steve Austin there. That's just... That's funny. That's so funny. But you want to know what's also funny? New Japan Wrestling also has problems. So New Japan Pro Wrestling's president, Masakazu Kusama, is out of his mind. So the report states here, quote, "There's a lot of people upset at the New Japan Pro Wrestling Company president, Masakazu Kusama. He has been cutting costs and slashing budgets, but he just bought an expensive new car for himself and apparently has a full-time chauffeur." That is the most heelish thing you can ever do. Can you imagine that was a storyline? Can you imagine if Vince McMahon did a storyline of cutting costs and then he comes in with a similar type of limousine, with a similar horn sticking out in the front of the limo, like John Bradshaw Layfield's limousine when JBL comes out with a similar limousine and such. Like, can you imagine that? Like, the story is Vince is cutting costs and he just buys himself a new car and a new chauffeur because he just fired the other chauffeur 3 years in the future by Austin. That's just ridiculous. Like, it's so ridiculous to hear that. Like, I can never imagine that being crazy. Like, wow. But speaking of wow, we do have something interesting. So in July the 11th, I think it was July the 11th, Danny Williams, the boxer that knocked out Mike Tyson, and I have talked about his other professional fights from his future to his past and the moments of his highlights for all the wrong reasons. Danny Williams, who recently knocked out Mike Tyson in July, just a couple months ago, was a huge wrestling fan and just did an angle in the UK indie show for a promotion titled FWA, whatever it's called. I don't know what it's called. But this is what it says. The angle was Williams getting into an altercation with wrestler Alex Shane, and they presented it as a shoot. And the heat was said to be insane. The angle got a lot of media attention in the UK, with almost all of them buying it as a shoot. Danny Williams is interested in doing something with WWE when they come to the UK in December. The word is they're interested after they publicly got from the Tyson victory. Well, he got the victory. But Dave Meltzer believes that he suspects Williams doing this kind of angle on an indie show might put WWF off. I don't know why I still say WWF, but that's what it says. It says WWF on the picture there, but it's WWE. But yeah, again, that is interesting. Don't get me wrong, Danny Williams knocking out Mike Tyson, even though Mike Tyson is not in his prime. He would box a year later against Kevin McBride in June of 2005, which should have been his last ever pro fight, and he did lost that fight as well. But all in all, it is interesting. But unfortunately, Williams would take on the WBC heavyweight champion, Vitaly Klitschko, in December, and he would lose, and the rest of his career after that would just go down in flame. But all in all, interesting to hear that. There's also some funny information here where someone pitched a reality show with Stone Cold Steve Austin and DDP recently. It states right here that a celebrity roommate show, the gist of it was basically, can two divorced retired pro wrestlers share an apartment without driving each other crazy? DDP was evidently down, but Austin refused, saying he has no interest in turning his life into a reality show. Meanwhile, DDP was apparently looking into some new ideas for a reality show called The Hottest Housewives in America, or something like that. But again, that right there is ridiculous. Like, dude, this was around the time when Austin had an argument, a controversial moment with him and Deborah, and which is something that we don't want to know about Stone Cold. DDP at the time, there was problems with him in the future, and this was before his DDP yoga thing. But yeah, it is interesting. Also, there is another interesting fun history here where they wanted to book out with hopes for Austin and Goldberg having a huge idea, which is down the toilet. They recalled that after WrestleMania with Goldberg and Brock Lesnar, which ended to be boring, the event with Goldberg was adamant that he would never go back to the WWE again. But Austin is still on decent terms with the company, even though he's not wrestling anymore, just to be met with Vince McMahon a couple weeks ago, that he doesn't really want to wrestle anywhere else other than the biggest company in the world. Basically, they aren't on the same page anymore, and the idea with Austin and Goldberg wrestling is dead. Wow, the idea with him and DDP sharing a room with divorced of themselves, that's a waste of time. And now this, and then he fails to even think about going to a Puerto Rico show in IWA. Like, Austin has a lot of stuff going on with him in his career. I can see why. This is ridiculous. Yeah, with Rowdy Piper, yeah, forget about that. He got fired, yeah, blah, blah, blah. We had some Mid-South Coliseum stuff going on, yep, blah, blah, blah. CM Punk pulled himself from a recent, yeah. We don't have to know about that. Nashville, blah, blah, blah. CZW, CZW tape shows air on pay-per-view for TNA. They were informed that TNA wrestlers can no longer work their tapings, with meaning Alex Shelley, Amazing Red, and Sanjay Dutt have all been pulled from upcoming CZW bookings. They could, in theory, still work the live shows, but their matches can't be broadcast in the CZW pay-per-views. I don't know. That's So you're telling me that they're working multiple promotions? That's kind of ridiculous. Let's not talk about the history with Dutch Mantel and Jeff Jarrett. I'm just going to skip that one away. Oh, yeah, I'm definitely going to skip that one away. But the only thing I'm not going to skip away is the information with TNA taping, where Florida almost didn't happen because of a Hurricane Francis. It's saying that they got all the wrestlers there, but as the day went on, they started to realize that they weren't going to have many fans, as they talked about canceling the tapings and filming a bunch of interviews. But by the show time, they had about 300 people there, and they all of them they put all of them in front of the cameras, and it looked halfway decent on TV. But it was a sparse crowd for a TV taping, to say the least. That's pretty funny. That's interesting. By the way, here's something interesting about going on in UFC. UFC heavyweight champion Frank Mir, who won in June against Tim Sylvia a few months ago, is working as a bouncer in a Spearmint Rhino strip club in Las Vegas. In case you're wondering why Frank, who makes six figures per fight, is still working as a strip club bouncer, the deal is that he's working 3 or 4 nights per week, making $500 to $1,000 per night in tips, and looks at naked women all night. I guess when you put it like that, which I'm sure that's what Dave said, which is kind of hilarious. You have this guy that's now a heavyweight champion and he's still working as a bouncer. That's pretty funny. That's pretty funny. Any second now, you have Steve Austin getting talks that he's going to Puerto Rico. They have this idea that he's having a conversation. Like, imagine these conversations is taking place in strip clubs. Oh, that's crazy. Oh boy. Anyway, back to the issued. By the way, there is a couple of stories I want to read here before we get to it. They have some SmackDown stuff, some other Raw stuff going on here, and I'm not going to talk about that stuff. And there's a moment with Ivory, who did an interview for trashing a company, but I'm not going to get into that, actually. But there is one interesting information about diva wrestlers. I do talk about this a lot. So the WWE has issued an apology over the Diva search, Diss the Diva. Diss the Diva segment got a lot of complaints saying it happened live and was unscripted and shouldn't have been allowed to happen. The segment was edited out from all international broadcasts that went out after. Dude, people say that WWE is live. They do keep saying that pay-per-views are live, but then they're putting out these other things that are taped and such, and it's like, what's live? What's taped? Is this entire show taped? I don't get it. It's just ridiculous. And I'm sure WCW has filmed their stuff live, but some of their backstage promos might have been taped during the time. But it is possible. But most of them were live. But it just goes to show you that there might be some stuff here that we might not know. But again, it's probably for the best. Oh boy, no, let's not talk about politician there. Here's a couple other stories left. So Eddie Guerrero, who's still alive at this time, just a year prior to his fatality, had an autobiography coming out next year called Cheating Death, Stealing Life, which was due out in May of 2004, or maybe in 2005, but then it got delayed several months and it ended up being released in December of 2005, about 1 month after Eddie passed away in November. Meanwhile, William Regal's book, Walking a Golden Mile, was scheduled to be released in March. That right there is actually sad to see that Eddie Guerrero's autobiography was never released at the time, but again, you gotta understand, it is the way life goes. But by the way, you want to know what's the most funniest story ever? This has to be one of the most funniest stories of all time. You got to say to yourself, this is funny. Let me read this. Porn star Jenna Jameson, porn star, released an autobiography recently as well. She doesn't acknowledge her brief appearances in ECW and WWE, but she does throw plenty of shade at The Undertaker, who she claims tried to hit on her in Las Vegas a few years ago and apparently got menacing when she rejected him. She claims that The Undertaker basically ran off her boyfriend from the bar and threatened to kick his ass and take Jenna away with him. She said she ran upstairs to her hotel room and then she and her boyfriend left because she was genuinely afraid that The Undertaker was planning to kidnap her and hurt her. The story has somehow flown under the radar for years, but yeah, she details all of it in her book. Dude, that's actually pretty funny. I can never imagine The Undertaker doing that unless if he was doing that in character, but in real life is ridiculous. Dude, by the way, I want to know, was The Undertaker also divorced at the time? This was before when Michelle McCool became a little bit of a WWE star, and she got eliminated off of Diva Search last year ago due to taking I think it was a dodgeball fight thing where she took the game serious or something. Has he ever? He did marry Sarah and a woman named Jody Lynn, but again, when was that marriage came? Yeah, she married Jody Lynn in 89 and 99. She married Sarah Frank in 2000 and divorced her in 2007, marrying Michelle McCool in 2010. Okay, so The Undertaker was still married in around this time, halfway through his second marriage with Sarah. So this is funny because this was during the time when The Undertaker came back in WrestleMania 20 in Madison Square Garden 2004 during the whole story when Kane and someone burned The Undertaker inside a casket, and then Undertaker came back as the dead man we all knew because of his biker gang was done for. But this is funny. The Undertaker comes back. You know what? She did say this was a few years ago, so Biker Undertaker was still a biker gang at the time. But imagine this story took place in 2004. Dude, can you imagine in 2004, The Undertaker comes back, meets a porn star. Dude, porn star's funny. Jenna is in a bar with her boyfriend in Las Vegas. Frank Mir is the bouncer. This is funny. Frank Mir, dude, I can imagine Frank Mir is the bouncer in the bar looking at naked woman, and he sees onto his other side, he sees the Undertakers in the bar hitting on a woman that's also a porn star who might be part of working in the club. Maybe she was working at that club around the time when Frank Mir was still being a bouncer before being a champion. But again, she's hitting off his boyfriend. The Undertaker's going, "Hey, Jenna, this will be your last ride. Rest in peace." And Frank Mir is standing there thinking, all right, well, where's the Monday Night Raw WWE cameras? Is this a work or is this a shoot? What's going on here? Jenna's screaming for someone to help me because this Undertaker is gonna kick my boyfriend and kill me too. And dude, I can imagine that The Undertaker scares her boyfriend off. She runs suit following him. That is ridiculous. They go upstairs to the hotel room. Dude, this is almost similar than Friday the 13th, the game, where if you were walking around trying to hide, but then you hear the song and then you hear the flashing of a VHS screen going on, you know that Jason is near you. I can imagine they're in the hotel room. They have cameras recorded there for Monday Night Raw. Her and her boyfriend are trying to escape, and you hear this loud sound of a bell ringing outside, and then it gets closer. It gets closer. It gets closer, and you realize the Undertaker. That is the sound of the Undertaker getting close. Can you imagine that they did that? Imagine that if you know the Undertaker is close to you, when you hear the bong sound coming close, but you hear it far away, you know that he's actually getting closer and closer and closer where you hear the bong sound. Like the Undertaker's walking upstairs to the hotel room doing his Undertaker. Dude, that would be an awesome storyline. And Frank Mir is like, what the heck is going on here? Is this a work? What? Is this real or is it not? It's like everyone think this is a work that this woman... Like, what is the Undertaker doing in a strip club? Where's your wife, Sarah? How do we know that DDP and Austin are not doing a reality show? What is a work and what is a shoot? I don't get it. Like, that is the most ridiculous story ever. Like, I don't believe in a word Jenna says, but dude, this would be the craziest thing you can ever see in history. Like, dude, that's what makes this so amazing. Like, the lines between fiction and reality can blur, but when you confuse the people in the real world in public, you don't even know. It's like, that's the problem. Like, you confuse them. Like, here's the thing. If you confuse someone and you confuse a bunch of fans, they're not going to watch wrestling anymore. So if you confuse them, you're going to lose them. Which is similar to when Vince Russo told Jeff Jarrett to lay down for Hogan in Bash the Beach 2000. The fans didn't know what was going on. They got so damn confused. What is the lines betwixt that? But when you think about this story, for instance, that is ridiculous. It's like, it's so funny. It's so funny. You just don't even know how ridiculous it is. I just don't know what to say. It's pretty funny once you actually read through it as much as you can, but with all this information going on, all of this stuff came out around the time during the Hopkins and De La Hoya show. So, yeah, that's ridiculous. Crazy. All right, anyway, let's get this over with. Crazy. Okay, let's get down to business. Let's go in September the 18th, 2004. Oscar De La Hoya versus Bernard Hopkins. This fight is a one of a million. Like, it's one of those fights where you think to yourself, as due to a point, because I do find this to be one of those moments in life where you think to yourself how amazing this was, because Oscar De La Hoya, Bernard Hopkins came out of their victories several months ago. Bernard dominated a 12-round boring snooze fest of a fight with his trilogy fight against Robert Allen, which in '98 they had their first match where the match ended in a no contest when Mills Lane tried to break up a clinch and he shoved Bernard out of the ring, and that kind of ended. And then they had a rematch the next year, which had Bernard winning by legit knockout. And their trilogy, it was terrible. It wasn't good. And of course, around the time, they even had other moments. Felix Sturm went back to Germany to take on a 30-5-3 fighter named Robert Frazier, which I don't think he's related to the Frazier family. Felix won the 12-round fight to win the WBO Intercontinental Middleweight title, so that will give him an opportunity to get another title shot around that time. So, yeah, same night. They also had other moments in Japan, such as in Kyoto, Japan, a Japanese female that goes by the name of Fujin Raika won the WIBA World Featherweight Championship against a 9-0 fighter named Melissa Fiorentino to win by a 10-round decision. The WIBA was still a legit major belt for women's boxing, and this was around the time when the WBA and WBC would come into women's boxing, so it's a normal basis. This wouldn't be the only time they would have Japanese women for world champions at the time, but surprisingly, it was actually a great win. They actually, unfortunately, had a points draw against Yuko Sodioka, taking on Yvonne Capels for the minimum weight WIBA belt, but that was a draw and never fought again. They also had other moments with other fighters on the show, other champions, and even maybe contenders for future champions. So, yeah, women's boxing is still trying to grow through for Japanese women and even other stuff going on behind the scenes. So, yeah. So, pretty much, there's some interesting stuff there. I can't argue about it. Can't. As for the UK around the time, the UK only hosted one show in Northern Hampshire with Carl Greaves winning a 6-round fight that night. And there's just some nobodies on this show by a promoter named Matt Shriven from Robin Hood Promotions. Robin Hood Promotions. That's a mouthful. Crazy. But yeah, technically with all this being said, this was just a build-up for Bernard versus Oscar. They're going on for middleweight. Oscar is the WBO middleweight champion, which right now he is a 6 weight class champion. But all in all, I can almost say this was actually pretty great for what it is. So, it was hard to find footages and other video footages of fights out there at the time. So it was pretty hard. It was pretty hard to find professional fights for where to look. So it was hard. For the main event, it wasn't, but you can tell. So the match had a guy named Aaron Garcia, another Garcia, who actually debuted in this show against a guy named Gerardo Robles, who was a 1-1 fighter. Aaron, in his debut, won the fight easily without any problems to take home a legit prize for the championship. Great victory, great win for 4 rounds. A guy named Carney Bowman, who was a 2-0 fighter in the super featherweight as well, also that fight, took on 2-2 fighter named Cardell James, who he won by a 2nd-round knockout. A guy from Turkey, actually that was 17-0 at the time, took on the Mexican fighter in the super lightweight, winning his 18th pro fight by a 2nd-round stoppage after the end of the 2nd round. Kelly Pavlik, who we will have talk about for him, scored his 22nd pro fight in his career against Carlton Holland, who was a 16-9-1 fighter. Also a 2nd-round knockout victory. Not bad. So with all that being said, Kelly Pavlik will have his own moments in boxing at this moment, but we won't get to him yet, but we'll get to him after the show. So yeah, with all that being said, good job for Bob Arum from Top Rank Promotions. Brad Goodman, also the matchmaker of this show, and they had doctors involved on it here. The Nevada Athletic Commission did a decent good job, so not bad. So here are the 3 fights on the show I will talk about. Kovi Jantua, born in Ghana, living in Las Vegas, Nevada, with a 27-1 record, takes on 27-1-1 Marco Antonio Rubio. Marco Antonio Rubio, many other Marco names out there for Mexico, who at the time would go on to have an interim championship belt in the middleweight 10 years later and actually have other belts, but never become champion in his life, even though he would defeat some champions in his career, but not much. Would come out as a legit opponent. At 24 years old, Marco comes in against the 30-year-old of all fighters coming out from countries around the world, and Kovi was one decent fighter. With Marco at 6'1", 5'11" for our fighter from Ghana, their arm lengths, their weigh-in, their everything going on. Technically, there is actually nothing to it for what it is. The entire fight, the show, had some amazing moments. Marco is the second guy that comes out of the ring. Jantua comes into the ring just wearing a decent, shiny outfit going on, while Marco comes in dressing up with a sombrero on his head. He is on fire. These guys are amazing. Michael Buffer comes in to announce the fighters. And by the way, I love it that he announces the referees. And you know what I like about they show us the scoreboard? Like, every time back in those days, whether it's HBO pay-per-view or Showtime, Michael Buffer comes in, tells the opponent across the ring, standing around 5'11", weighing in about 154 pounds, and then they show a small screen of the fighter, and then they show a screen here basis of the record of 27 wins, 17 by knockout, 1 defeat, 0 draws. Covey, and it shows the screen stating that he has a 9-1 in his last 10 fights with 9 wins, 1 defeat, all 9 wins by knockout. So I actually love that they show that. I love the screen they show. It's so damn good. And just like for Marco, it's amazing. Okay, so this is the only thing I wrote down in the fight. This is the only thing I wrote on my notes here. So this is what it says. Okay, so the referee's name is Jay Nady. Tony Weeks would be the other referee, and Kenny Bayless would be part of the main event as a referee, so keep that in mind. So this is what I wrote down for the fight. The bell rings. Marcos throws a jab. Covey throws a left jab as well. Both are on orthodox stance. Rubio is in green, light blue for Covey. And out of nowhere, Marco tries to set off another left jab, and without hesitation, Covey sets up swinging a huge left Deontay Wilder swing, and it backs up Marco. Both throw one jab for each other, miss, and then Jantu throws a punch downstairs. Marco sets up a 3-punch combination with a left, right, and then a left downstairs. He exposes his left of his right glove, exposing his face. And Covey sets up this wild left power punch, and Marco falls down like a ton of bricks, hits the back of his spine and the back of his head on the concrete of the ring, and the referee comes in, counts it in, and Marco tries to get back up. He's stumbling, and he falls down again, like how Sonny Liston tried to act like he was knocked down with a heavy punch in the Ali 2 fight. And Jay Nady waves the fight at 33 seconds by KO victory, giving Covey his 28th victory by first round KO, becoming the WBC International Super Featherweight and the WBO Super Welterweight title eliminator. So, yeah. What a way to start off. Like, that right there was a great victory for what it was. So, yeah, Marco losing his balance and seeing Covey win the fight makes you think to yourself that this guy is going to be a legend in boxing. Like, that's ridiculous. Now, unfortunately, we do have to understand the significance of this. It was a great victory for Covey, but unfortunately, his time in boxing would not go the way he wanted it to, because in January the 9th, he would take on Kasim Uoma from the country of Uganda for the IBF Super Welterweight belt, which Covey lost. He took on some nobody fighters around the time in 2005. Well, not terrible fighters. He would fight for the IBF title against Arthur Abraham in the middleweight in May of 2006, which was I wouldn't say a close fight, but not a dominant fight. But again, Arthur defeated Covey there. Covey fought a couple fights in 2007, winning and then drawing a fight, wins a fight a year later, and then he takes on Dmitry Pirog, who was 13-0 at the time. And Dmitry would win that 12-round fight easily and giving Covey a retirement. And that was it. As for Marco, the rest of his career, he did try his best to continue on boxing. He would win on an interim title, but not a world title. Again, they do show us the replay of the punch and everything else. And again, the way the fight ended, that's ridiculous. It does stink that Covey was a knockout. Covey really knew how to knock out fighters. With 32 victories and 21 by knockout in the entirety of his career, even coming into his final years of boxing, he was still winning those last fights by knockout. He was a knockout killer. Maybe not by all KO, but when he KO'd his opponents, he would KO them. Understand, Covey was a decent fighter for who he was. It makes sense why he was known as the pride of Ashanti for the way he was pronounced by his alias. But again, he was a decent fighter, and I gotta give him credit. It was a great victory, and it was not bad. Oh boy. So, Orlando Salido, two-time weight class champion, multiple-time featherweight champion, taking on Juan Manuel Marquez for the IBF World Featherweight Champion. At this time, Juan Manuel would come out not once, not twice, not three times, but as a four-time weight class champion, a guy that took on so many fighters. And surprisingly, Juan Manuel and Orlando are two guys that have controversial fights in their career. Some taking on the legends and some taking on greenhorns. Yes, Orlando was the guy that defeated Vasily Lomachenko by a controversial fight in Texas with Lawrence Cole as a referee, and we all know what happened there. And Juan Manuel Marquez having a feud out with Manny Pacquiao at the time. And this was around the time when Manuel scored his draw against Pacquiao in their first meeting around the time. While Salido is winning fights by knockout everywhere. But surprisingly, Juan is the one fighting opponents nonstop as well. These guys are active in 2003. They're winning fights back-to-back. In the spring, they both had one fight. Orlando won. Juan scored a split decision draw. And even though Pacquiao won the feud and the trilogy against Juan actually won the war in their last fight. So that says a lot. Again, Orlando's 25 years old, 31-year-old Juan Manuel, both orthodox fighters. And you got to understand, when I saw this fight, it was interesting because I had to look up more information, just like the Covey and Marco fight. Here's what's said about this fight. So on BoxRec, it shows that this was an IBF belt, third title defense for Marquez. By the way, he was also the WBA featherweight championship, but BoxRec doesn't show us the WBA, but it does show the wiki on WikiBoxRec, so if you click on it, so that's his second title defense. So the information states here, quote, Salido unusually came into the fight very passive, giving away many rounds of the early mid-rounds. Marquez was successfully counterpunching Salido and building a significant lead. Salido closed strong and won the later rounds, but it wasn't enough, and Marquez got a well-deserved victory. So when watching the fight from start to finish, I'm just going to skip this entire fight. Just give me a couple minutes to talk about this fight because this is what I have to say about the fight. Make that 3 minutes. And because we're almost to the 1 hour mark of this, I might as well get through with it. So the fight itself, it was ridiculous. Watching the beginning part of this fight was almost like watching Lonnie Daniels versus Clarissa Shields, where Lonnie Daniels was just doing nothing. She was dancing around the ring, having Carissa just out punching her in every round, and Lonnie wasn't doing nothing. Her strategy was that she wanted to get to the mid part of the rounds, of the first to the 7th or 8th round, and then coming into the championship rounds, she's going to start throwing heavy punches by knocking out Carissa Shields. Here's the problem. Lonnie Daniels only had one knockout in her 12 professional fights at the time. And even though Carissa, she has like 20 wins and only 3 knockouts, so nothing for knockouts there. And Carissa Shields was dominating the entire fight. So I don't know why Lonnie Daniels bored the fight. Even Daniel Perkins did a good job on Carissa. And even though Franchon Cruz was doing an okay job entertaining the fight last February, but she just didn't have the stuff done for Carissa. It was horrible. It's even horrible that in December, Lonnie lost the IBF light heavyweight belt against a German fighter, only to go down to super middleweight to defeat Shadicia Green. And we're still trying to wait for update. So, my point is, I don't know what Orlando was thinking of. Because we go to round 1, all right, Marquez. Round 2, Marquez. Round 3, Marquez. Round 4, Marquez. And then we go to round 5. It's like, wait. Sounds like Orlando's getting something here. And then we get to round 6. It's like, wow, Orlando is trying to get stuff done. Okay. And so I gave him the 6th round. The 5th round, I barely gave it to Marquez. And then in round 7, he finally comes in. And of course, the thing is, Marquez was just landing out jabs and doing everything done. And he was outboxing Orlando. Orlando had moments in that fight with the 6th round and maybe the 5th and even the 7th round. And it looked like Orlando was going to do something good. He gave away the first half of the fight. It was boring. Comes into that 7th round and just goes berserk. He wins round 6, round 7. Depends on what the judges think, but some were generous. But then comes round 8, round 9, round 10, Juan Manuel Marquez dominated those rounds. He just found the mark. And then the last 2 rounds in the championship rounds, Orlando finally found the mark. He put himself in and just got the job done. So even though I did score the fight 116 to 112 for Marquez, which is kind of ridiculous for giving rounds 6, 7, 11, and 12 for Orlando. 2 judges had it 117, 111, 118 to 110 for the 3rd judge, giving Marquez the win. So it was an accurate score, and even though Orlando would go on the next several years winning titles, getting controversial wins, and Marquez would have his feud with Pacquiao, getting on with Mayweather and such, so at least these guys would have an okay career against themselves, but this fight I would never watch. Never in a million years. Done. Anyway. So we finally have it. Oscar De La Hoya versus Bernard Hopkins. This is the undisputed 3-belt era for it. So if Oscar wins, he's a 3-weight class champion, or maybe 4-weight. But again, the WBO belt is still not a legit belt. So don't go there. But again, this is what's shown. Bernard wins. He's still an undisputed champ. This is his 19th title defense for his IBF belt, and the other belts he won years later. So not all legit. As for Oscar, he's still trying to come back from his pro defeat he had in his 3rd pro defeat, which took place around the time. Let me just double look this up of his opponent, if I can type in the right information here. So he lost against Shane Mosley in September last year ago, which was sufferable enough, which is why he went up to middleweight against the Felix Sturm fight. All in all, this fight was pretty good for what it was. The fight was decent. And even though this entire fight was surprising, because BoxRec pointed this fight as the most tactical of the entire... Like, the entire fight was mostly tactical, if that makes any difference. But here's something interesting. 3 days before the fight... Now, just to let you guys know, this would be the last ever fight for Bernard's winning by knockout. Because after this, the next 12 years, he would just have all fights being by decision. Well, maybe from the parts of Joe Smith Jr. knocking out the 51-year-old Hopkins out of the ring in 2016. But ignore that. Ignore that. My point is this. So around the time, 3 days before the fight, due to a little workout, Joe Chavez, who was the cut man for De La Hoya, was trying to remove the tape after having a light workout just to get De La Hoya ready for the fight, when he accidentally sliced him between his second and third finger. So Dr. Biff McCann, who administered an injection of lidocaine, and closed the wound with 11 stitches. De La Hoya informed the Nevada State Athletic Commission in case of a substance showed up in the post-fight urine test. De La Hoya did not make an issue of the cut after the fight. He said the hand was perfectly fine. I was popping him with jabs. I felt fine. He caught me with the right punch. That's it. What right punch? Was it the last ever punch that Hopkins would ever score a knockout in his career? Well, guess what? Because considering that Ring Magazine titled this as the Super Fight Collectible, and this was also for the Ring and Lineal-Weight Championship belt as well, and Hopkins being rated as a 2-1 favorite, considering he's being made $10 million for this fight, and Oscar De La Hoya is being made $30 million for this fight, like, yeah, that's a lot of money going down for a fighter that's not going to win due to his stitch cut. And I just don't know if that's the case. Like, if Joe Chavez didn't cut Oscar's hand, would Oscar go in the distance in the 12-round fight? We don't know. But what we do know is the outcome of the fight. So the first round of the fight was even. Both guys were throwing on jabs. 30 seconds in the fight, Bernard did try to jump in to throw some jabs and then throw some power out 1-2 punches here or there. And then Oscar would sometimes go in, try to throw punches, and they would throw on a clinch in the first minute and a half of the fight. But again, there were clinches, there were tactical moments, and both were throwing on punches. The first round was so hard to judge. Both were landing punches and building themselves up. So I gave the first round to Oscar. The second round did give Oscar a chance to outpunch and start turning around some abilities here and managed to dodge some punches on Bernard. But Bernard still managed to throw punches, and he did manage to stumble with 30 seconds left in the second round when he missed out a punch and almost stumbled a little bit. But again, Oscar managed to come in without nothing going on and managed to outbox Bernard. So all in all, depending on what the judges think, I gave the first 2 rounds to Oscar, and we come into the third round, and both guys are now evening themselves up with a battle. They both clinch each other with 30 seconds into the third round, and then 30 seconds later, Bernard just starts going in, going forward, throwing out the left and the right sometimes, and sometimes when he does that, Oscar goes for multiple body punches every time Bernard goes forward. There's not a lot of information for me to talk about the Marquez and Salido fight, depending on how that fight went, because it was boring. But this fight was pretty entertaining. So the third round was pretty much as simple as it is. There was a moment where both guys did start leading on jabs in the final seconds of the third round, and then Hopkins was ducking, and Hopkins was managed to go duck, missing out a left uppercut on Oscar at the moment during the end of the round, but it was a close third round for De La Hoya, so 3-0. And then Hopkins comes into the fourth round and he manages to do a good job. By the way, the third round for Letterman, he gave the third round to Hopkins, which, again, it was a close round, just like round one. So anyone could say it's 2-1 for De La Hoya, 3-0 for De La Hoya, or even 2-1 for Hopkins. So it's a pretty tough fight to judge. The first three rounds are really tough to judge. Just saying. That does go for the consumption of round four. So the judges might have seen it differently for Hopkins. In round four, De La Hoya did try to go for some swings and upper on misses and misses all the punches. And then seconds later, Hopkins goes in, tries to throw in some lefts here or there. And again, even though Hopkins isn't into the body work punches like De La Hoya is doing, he manages to dodge a good amount of punches in the fourth round, out dodging everything from Hopkins. There was maybe I think the referee gave a warning for something to keep his punches up for some reason in the last minute, but Hopkins managed to hold himself in the fourth round and get the round done. Come round five, he manages to outperform Hopkins a little bit, but again, Bernard was doing most of the work because he managed to throw out punches and back up Oscar, managed to work on the left jab, and he started outworking Oscar more than ever. And during the last seconds of the fifth round, there was a moment in the last 10 seconds of the fifth round where Bernard set off a little bit of a left on jab, and then he moves forward and then goes for another left jab, and then Oscar just lost his balance, hits the ropes, and then Bernard just goes in without a care of the world, and then both guys just start mashing punches at each other before the end of the fifth round. But come to the sixth round would be a good round for Oscar. Oscar managed to find his works. He manages to outbox Bernard, and Bernard manages to miss punches, but there were punches being connected for both guys. Their left jab of the entire show was so good. They're both landing on great jabs. The first 6 rounds were pretty decent for what they were. It was a devastating fight for anyone to win. Oscar did a good job in the first half of the fight, and coming into the end of the 6th round, it was kind of surprising. He managed to land the last punch in the 6th round, so it seemed like all's fair in love war. Depending on what the comment is, but yeah, it was a pretty good fight for the first half. I had the first half being scored 4-2 for Oscar winning the fight after 6 rounds. So it seemed like everything was going well for Oscar for what it was. But then come to round 7, round 8, round 9, it was crazy. Now, Letterman, keep this in mind, Letterman did give round 1, 2, and 6 for De La Hoya, and 3, 4, and 5 for Hopkins, so close round. But with all that being said, the second half of the fight was not even going to be finished. Hopkins managed to outwork on De La Hoya, because when De La Hoya sometimes tries to go forward, Hopkins found the way. And when Hopkins tries to go forward, he finds the way. Round 7 and round 8 were so devastating. He tries to go forward. Oscar sometimes goes for by punches and a huge left uppercut at one point. And again, Hopkins managed to out-dominate De La Hoya in every single bit. Rounds 7 and 8 were the most dominant rounds by Hopkins. The entire fight, he was just on fire from the entirety of the fight. And there was a moment at 1 minute, with only 2 minutes left of the 8th round, where Hopkins, or maybe De La Hoya, managed to throw out a punch or something, and Kenny Bayless gave warning for Hopkins for a back of the head. But again, it didn't matter. Hopkins was in there to destroy De La Hoya for good. And even though this might have been the moment where the trainers and the managers didn't want to promote Hopkins by being a knockout fighter anymore, depending on the story about that, but he just went in there and just found the mark. There was a moment during the final seconds of the 8th round where De La Hoya managed to try to go for the attack in the final seconds of the fight and go forward and try to throw some punches, and then Bernard stops him and then he clinches him at the end. But again, it was just a round-winning performance for anyone. It was crazy. And then we come to the 9th round where it all gets worse because Hopkins is finally finding the mark. De La Hoya, we don't know if his injury is getting worse or not. And again, it's hurting badly. And by the way, we don't know if there's information about I don't know. Like I think the announcers, I wasn't paying attention to the announcers of this fight, but I think one of the announcers talked about the injury of Oscar's cut. And there are moments talking about the fights they had a few months ago. But again, I really can't, I wasn't paying attention to much about the fight either way. But still, I think they did mention about that. So 1 minute and 45 seconds left of the 9th round. Oscar tries to come in, throw some body punches. Again, upstairs punches, downstairs punches. Nothing can be said. And before you know it, they were just crashing each other's heads together. And then the camera couldn't catch it. Hopkins lands a right hook. And then he sets up what I can say was a left body punch and another body punch. But I couldn't see the right that he hit on with De La Hoya. And De La Hoya hits the canvas. He's landing on his legs. And it seems like he felt something hurting his body because he hits the canvas and then he's screaming in pain. And the referee stops the fight before the count of 10. Or maybe he did. And at 1 minute 38 seconds of the fight, Bernard Hopkins wins the fight. So the replay shows that there was a perfect body punch right around here in the back that might have sent De La Hoya to the canvas. But yes, seeing De La Hoya landing, putting his knees on the ground and his arms like this on the canvas, and then he flops to his back for some reason. I don't know. It just seemed like something was off. But all in all, nothing could be said. Judge Keith McDonald had it 77-75 for De La Hoya, but Paul Smith 78-74 and Dave Moretti 79-73 had it favored for Bernard. So Bernard was winning the fight. I had the fight even 76-76, who you expect. But all in all, it was a decent fight and it was a great win for Bernard. I think it was actually pretty good for what it was, and it was a great victory. The final years for De La Hoya and Hopkins was crazy. De La Hoya would go on to retire from boxing because of this, but he would come back in 2006 to take on Ricardo Mayorga, win the WBC super welterweight belt, only to lose by split decision a year later against Mayweather. By 2008, he takes on Steve Forbes, wins easily, and then lost against Pacquiao in an 8-round stoppage in the 8th round. And that was it. As for Bernard Hopkins, his 20th title defense for these titles would come to an end when he defeated Howard Eastman in February of 2005, who was born in Guyana. And the guy wasn't a decent fighter, but a promising prospect who actually tried. Unfortunately, in July and December of 2005, he had 2 fights with Jermaine. Jermaine won the undisputed belts, which was the 4-belt belt. But then he vacated the IBF belt, and that was the end of the reign until December when he had a rematch with Bernard. And Bernard just decided to go up to light heavyweight a year later in 2006. He lost against guys like Joe Calzaghe, had a draw with John Pasco, but won later. Lost against Chad Dawson after their rematch fight with a huge unable accidental injury in their first fight. And he was going on winning fights when he was like 49 years old in 2014 until he lost against Sergey Kovalev in 2014. 2 years later, Joe Smith ended it all. So Yeah, that's an interesting story for both guys. But you know what? You guys let us know what you think in the comments, what you think about this fight. I give this fight a 4 out of 10. It was an entertaining fight for what it was. Not a classic fight, but it was entertaining, so that's all I can say about it. Good job for Bob Arum putting on a great performance, a great show for the fans, and congrats for Bernard winning this show for the entirety of September the 18th. So that was the end for September the 18th, 2004. Thank you so much for watching this episode. And with that being said, see you guys in the next Mr. Gloat podcast.